Thank you, everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about accessory dwelling units, and we all know they're known as ADUs. I'll be hosting the conversation, Building Green's 6th Fall Forum event on rethinking neighborhood community and neighborhood assets. My name is June Grant, founder and design principal of Blink Lab Architecture. We are a research-based architecture and design studio committed to the craft of buildings, their potential to enhance cities and develop socially responsible solutions to complex real-world problems. For this event, the hat I'm wearing is as a national consultant on the design, development, and implementation of ADU policies and programs. As you know, California is facing an intersection crisis, housing and health, which stem from the centuries of social inequities. For housing, ADUs have the potential to promote accessible, affordable housing within existing neighborhoods, fundamentally serve as a tool for wealth building and insecurity, well, rather as a tool for income security, and allow both comfortable age in place and generational stability. Maybe less intuitively, ADUs provide an opportunity for workforce development, strengthening community bonds, bringing a sense of security to neighborhoods. They can be so much more than neighborhood sheds. ADUs can be opportunities to consider culture, how we socialize, and add much needed texture and elasticity to the fabric of our neighborhoods. For example, our backyards could be turned into gardens to help bring fresh food to food deserts. Garages and driveways could hold more than cars, but become schools or local businesses to create resilience and accessibility. Neighbors could teach each other home building and repair skills to build shared skills and strengthen community. Okay, so let's meet our panelists. Today, we are fortunate to hear from 3 innovators and community advocates. Each one brings a unique perspective on tangential industries that support the actualization of ADUs as assets for families, neighborhoods, and communities. Teresa Baker of Latch Collective is the founder of a collective advocating for housing solutions for the Los Angeles area, specifically for spaces that are affordable, sustainable, well-designed, and safely built. Latch Collective is reimagining workforce development by providing home building skills to homeowners and community members to realize driveways and backyard gardens as assets for community lots and food for their neighbors. Neil Heller of Neighborhood Workshop, and if that wasn't enough, also of Incremental Development Alliance, is an urban planner and designer who promotes small-scale, locally focused, and community-oriented real estate development that supports the economic mobility of residents and the fiscal health of the municipality. That's actually a good thing. Neil uses a pro forma-based approach to quantify potential code changes and align policy and community development outcomes. We're also going to talk about ACUs, accessible commercial units. Shira Shaham, sorry, Shira, of East Bay Permanent Real Estate Collective, EBPREC, Arizmendi Construction Cooperative, and if both of those are not enough, she's also on the Advisory Council of Build It Green for new initiatives. Shira works to lay the groundwork for community-led property acquisitions and stewardship in historically marginalized BIPOC communities, BIPOC meaning Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, to combat displacement in the East Bay. Thank you all for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to the audience for sharing a part of your afternoon with us. We'd like this session to be engaging for all, so please submit questions during the session in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom window, not in the chat, people. After our panel discussion, we will try to answer as many questions as possible. One last thing before we get started, we'd like to take a quick poll to see who's in the audience. You'll see the screen pop up with a few options of roles. Please select up to 2 roles you most closely identify with. Architect designer, city officer, planner, home inspector, developer builder, green building consultant, rater, homeowner, manufacturer supplier, nonprofit advocate, real estate appraiser, finance, or other. Hosts and panelists can't vote, unfortunately. We'll skew the results. So welcome and thank you all for joining us. Let's take a while as we're waiting on the results of the poll. That was fast. Okay, so who do we have here? Of course, 26% of the attendees are architects or designers. 22 identify as city officer, planner, or home inspector. 22% identify as developer builder. 13% as green building consultant. 30% are homeowners. That's great. Manufacturer supplier, 4%. Nonprofit advocate, 13%. Real estate appraiser finance, 4%. I wish they were here. And those who identify as other, 26%. So we need to figure out what other means. Maybe we can put that in the chat to explain what that is. Okay, I'm gonna minimize that for a second. All right, so let's get started. Welcome all and thank you for joining us. Let's get started with our panelists. So I'm gonna set the background. Accessory dwelling, for those who may or may not know, you never know. Accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, are a key component to helping provide affordable housing, flexible living spaces for homeowners, and an opportunity to generate passive income. And as neighborhoods rapidly gentrify, a key to keeping people housed in the neighborhoods they grew up in, these small homes are also serving additional purposes beyond the pandemic. They're serving as schools, home offices, space for childcare, elderly caretakers, and extended family. So my question is directed at Teresa. With Latch Collective, your cooperative model works closely with the cousin of the ADU, i.e. the tiny home. Can you tell us more about tiny homes and what opportunity they provide? What new assets and value can they provide the land homeowner?
Sure, I'm very happy to talk about tiny homes. Many of you have heard about tiny homes, maybe. They're becoming more popular as more and more people are being pushed out of mainstream housing options. People are trying to imagine, well, what is left for me and how can I fit in? How can I have my dream home or even something that just houses me in a sustainable manner, while also being intentional and choosing a housing option that really fits with their values, you know, being extra sustainable by saying, I'm only going to live within my means, or challenging themselves. So many people are playing with this idea of tiny living as a way of their potential future. And it's inspiring people to take in housing into their own hands in a lot of ways. So whereas building a home these days is not something that someone generally thinks they're going to do by themselves, the tiny home idea has got people thinking, well, what if I build it myself? Could I do that? Is it possible? And so Latch Collective, you know, we are around as a cooperative business. We are made of people who are building their own homes or are hoping or are interested in building their own homes, supporting each other by sharing skills and resources and teaching those skills and resources to our wider community. Most people are just trying to play with this idea and find out what really housing solution is available to them, looking into ADUs, but also what else is in there, and really being passionate about living within their own means and finding a housing solution that fits their values and their abilities. And so across California, it's really exciting because there's a growing opportunity for movable tiny homes as ADUs. Many municipalities such as Los Angeles, you know, San Diego, San Luis Obispo, San Jose have legalized movable tiny homes as ADUs. And so now there's this legal framework for homeowners to be able to welcome in those who are trying to take housing into their own hands, who have potentially built it themselves. Not everyone gets there though, because, you know, building your own home does take many steps, but maybe they've built some of it, or they've purchased their tiny home, but they're now able to connect with these homeowners who are able to offer them space. So, you know, we do recognize the potential and the great benefit for homeowners who now can have this ADU option, but with very low input cost. You know, you don't necessarily have to build the home or pay for that construction of the home. Someone's bringing their own home with them. So the, you know, preparing your property to be able to house that home, and also the quick turnaround time that it can have for someone. So there's a ton of flexibility in that, where you don't need to necessarily develop your property to always have that home on it. But when you need it, you know, there's an economy crunch as a homeowner, and you're saying, I need some rental income, or maybe your life situation changes, and you know, you need maybe a connection with somebody, and you're more willing to host somebody, or you need to host a family member, and you need that movable option that helps. So there's a lot of flexibility in that. And so now there's this plethora of tiny home enthusiasts and tiny home owners who are just looking to connect to these these main homeowners, and hoping to, you know, build connections with them. A lot of tiny home owners are very passionate about sustainable living, and really dreaming and yearning for this connection to space, to outdoor space, and thinking about how can we share this garden, and how can we offer benefits to the place that we live? How can we maybe improve their outdoor space and grow food and share with them? And what other skills can we share with them, and what other ways can we connect with the main homeowner and form a little micro community in that way? So it's very exciting, this you know, growing new option.
Yeah, the I know San Jose, I read when San Jose made it legal as part of the housing options, and I want to touch on that a little bit later, but I want to also pivot to Neil, and really start to understand. Can you explain and probably position how ADUs fit in your work at Incremental Development Alliance? And where is Incremental Development Alliance located?
So the Incremental Development Alliance is a nonprofit that is looking to cultivate 1,000 small developers nationwide. The home base is Minneapolis, Minnesota, but as faculty, we have practitioners from around the country with a variety of skill sets. And so different faculty will come on board for a project depending on the needs of that project. So while there will be sessions to teach folks how to become small developers, that's kind of what the Incremental Development Alliance is primarily known for. Everyday regular people, I think 70% of the people on this call were either architects, planners, or builders. And so we see those people as probably being the easiest, most natural next step people to become, you know, small scale developers themselves. But then what I do with Incremental Development Alliance is kind of the other side of that coin. So there is teaching regular people to become small scale developers themselves. But then I oftentimes work on the back end of that in developing a small developer friendly ecosystem, working with the finance community or the city planners, so to make an environment that is small developer friendly, so that the small developers don't come up with a project idea and then when they go out and they meet the zoning code, meet the banker, they don't hit a brick wall.
So are you working directly with homeowners? Is that what?
Oftentimes, yes. Yep, oftentimes. And then we call ADUs the gateway drug to small scale development. From there, you know, when you start to figure out some financing, you start to build a team, contractors, you start to understand how to work some development pro formas, how to do a, you know, basic pro forma of operating costs and net operating income, and you learn those terms. And then maybe you want to apply that more broadly in your community. Maybe it's a duplex, or you want to renovate a small commercial building, or something we'll talk about later, maybe you want to build an accessory commercial unit. But I think
talk to us about that, because I was going to ask you, can you also introduce the ACU, which is not a term that many individuals are aware of?
Yeah, so it's a term that that I've coined recently. So I wrote a little bit about them, and that article that I wrote, the blog post, got a little bit of attention. This notion of an accessory commercial unit being similar to an accessory dwelling unit in the way that it might offer a property owner an incremental step of some kind of development that can generate income, have asset to the community, but also potentially be a more affordable space, similar to an ADU for residential, but have it be, for local business and be commercial. Now, I would describe an accessory commercial unit basically as the increment above a live work. So live work is like a townhome where the ground floor might have an office. And maybe it's the commercial space is just slightly more robust than that, but it's not quite as intense as a small commercial building.
So is the idea kind of like a cottage industry, but the college is up front, or actually it's a cottage industry. It's almost it's a structure that supports income generating commerce.
Yes, yes. And it's most likely to be built and occupied by local folks in the community. These aren't the kinds of buildings that any large investment firm is going to be chasing after.
Right.
But I've been attempting to popularize them with blog posts, finding images, different locations. Some of you may have watched Netflix Luke Cage, right? In that, Pop's Barbershop is in accessory commercial unit in an English basement in a New York brownstone. So that would be maybe the most popular version that I've seen recently. But as I've done more research, I found them in Elmwood Avenue in Buffalo, New York is a beautiful section of Buffalo where it's a commercial street with little commercial buildings up front and then residential buildings in the back. Toronto has a lot of them, and so does Montreal.
A couple of things come to mind, and I can think of also some similar examples where we have not called them ACUs, but you might see where a garage that was out front of a building was too small and it was extended and then given a storefront. So you can see the bones of the original residential garage, and then it was later converted to some kind of retail. But it's not necessarily on a deeply commercial strip. It's kind of like a road that's maybe partially residential, partially commercial. Are there any residential zoning barriers to the implementation of ACUs that you're identifying?
Absolutely. I think that, a lot of this, the whole framework for this, even with ADUs or ACUs, is to expand these options at this sort of gentle spectrum, right? At the low end of the spectrum, call it gentle density. But carving out these options, I think, over time, many of our neighborhoods, actually many of our cities are largely zoned single family only, right? So maybe even more than 80% of many of our large cities are even single family zoned. And that often just means a single family only house. So we become very narrow in what we will allow or accept in our communities. And not only is it like, oftentimes in some cities, not only is it a single family house only, it's like a single family house only of a certain size on a certain size lot. And in addition to that, it's also add the covenants or the HOA requirements on top of that, right? So it just makes it so extremely narrow in what we'll provide.
Yeah, there are many states that are trying to, okay. Yeah, many states are addressing that, thankfully. But I wanna bring up a living example in Oregon, Ashland. Some of you may be familiar with Ashland, Oregon a bit, but I'll just give a backstory. Ashland, Oregon is just across the border from California, and it's a college town. But for more than 100 years, it has had a dense supply of backyard buildings, backyard cottages, which started with, which is actually funny that there is actually a living successful example that is rarely ever talked about, as ACUs and ADUs are presented as if they're new. But in Ashland, the backyard cottage, it has been part of the urban fabric for more than 100 years, to the point where the street system has alleyways that are deeply used. Very few individuals walk on the main street. Now, what's fascinating about this adoption of the smaller unit is that it's used both for residential as well as commerce. It's both an art space and a small studio space. It's where you might start your first graphic design business before you take on, formal corporate office space. So they have built in a lot of flexibility in their urban planning way before we all started talking about in-law units. And I find this rather fascinating. And so I want to bring Shira into the conversation, because that neighborhood and an ecosystem that Ashland has been able to create, having done it for more than 100 years. I know that EB-Prec is thinking about how can we use community assets differently? How can we use in-law units differently in relation to one another at the neighborhood scale? Can you share ways that EB-Prec and the other organizations are reimagining underutilized spaces in your work and intangible benefits that arise from creating these spaces, these non-typical uses?
Absolutely. And I think it would behoove me to introduce EB-Prec as well, so that you can get to know the context from which I say these things. We're looking at the whole built environment as an ecosystem. What does community need? And ADUs, accessory dwelling units, accessory commercial units, I love that. Tiny homes, those are tools in the toolkit of the built environment. These are ways we can serve our communities. These are ways that we can organize and we can and create an urban fabric to reflect the social fabric that we're creating at the same time. So at EB-Prec, we're working to permanently remove land from the speculative market and put it under democratic control of community. We center Black, Indigenous, people of color, and allied communities to combat displacement here in the East Bay. It simulates home ownership for resident owners and the mobility model, in that with every monthly payment, they pay down a share, an equity share in the building that they're living in. And so if and when they leave, they take something with them. So we're reimagining home ownership as co-ownership. We're putting all the players in one system. That's investor owned. That's the residents, the investors, the community members, the workers. I'm on the staff collective. I'm a worker. We put everyone in one ecosystem, so that with the common mission and vision and incentives to act towards each other's mutual benefit. So really, the community owners are the driving force behind the vision, and the staff collective helps steward that mission, make it become a reality. We are empowering and providing a mechanism for marginalized communities to take ownership of the development they see around them in Oakland and the East Bay, rather than being displaced by it. So I think the key here to what we're doing is that it's about ownership of assets. So,
but there's a trend that I'm also seeing too, where you're able to have part of our average society are starting to shift their mindset about how they'd like to leave and provide a legacy of some sort. So can you talk to us about Prince Street in Berkeley, because that's a really successful project, and Project 1699.
Sure, thanks for bringing that up. There's many ways projects come into our hands, and one of them is through donation. So Prince Street came to us through an elder in the dance community who actually had an existing garage conversion. It's a dance studio. And now that her single family residence and that dance studio are in community hands, and we've worked with Destiny Art Center to and others in the community to house dancers and performing artists there. They're moving. Actually, I'm working on the repairs right now. They're moving it. Scheduled to move in next month, and we're really excited to work with this new cohort of folks of artists that would likely otherwise be priced out of the area. Really excited not only to provide a home, but also co-create with them the space that they want to see, both in their own lives and in their offerings to community.
And in Project 1699?
Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped to Prince Street. Oh, no, you did say Prince Street. Okay,
I see both.
1699, another, and 1699 is a small corner lot in West Oakland that is vacant. There's a new vacant property tax in Oakland to disincentivize developers to just simply hold on to land and rental housing units until the market matures. for them and can actually house people and be used for the community. So we're actually, we were working with the owner there who kind of saved it from the speculative market, but it might go back on. So if you know of any equity partners, we can talk. And what we were on that property, we're partnered with Black Sanctuary Gardens, 7 at Atlanta Museum, and CASPA, California Straw Building Association, to first use the empty lot as a sanctuary for Black folks in West Oakland and garden space to help during that time where we're co-designing with the community cohort that's going to be inhabiting the space. The people will be remediating the land there and starting to steward the land and starting to build ties and stories with the land. And it's also being used as a place to build a tiny home right now. And so our thought is also to, our partners also want to park a tiny home and do gardening at the same time.
That's great. Wow, that's awesome. And you bring up the actual construction, and I want to pivot back to Teresa about, can you talk to us a little bit more about how Latch Collective is using small home building as an opportunity to create community assets like resiliency and home workforce development, like a little bit more detail, community bonding at scale, and how is that working at Latch Collective?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Yeah. So as mentioned, yeah, we're a cooperative of those who are building our own skills, have varied skill levels. And, you know, most people who become a part of Latch Collective, one, are interested in imagining what it would be like to live in a tiny home, but two, are majority women who don't necessarily have access to the primarily male spaces of the building world. And so thinking of, you know, being able to empower each other with these skills in construction, you know, we do have some men in our organization for sure, but being able to think about, okay, well, how do I use these tools, and how does tiling work, and having mini workshops on these topics so that we can you know, more identify these skills in us and what our preferences are, and design homes that will work for us. And also to be able to work together on projects. So co-building is a big thing that we do in Latch Collective. You know, someone's working on their tiny home, we want to come together and work on that project with them, whatever days that they want to have people coming and helping them on that project. We're doing a lot of digital co-builds these days, but you know, we helping like raise the walls on a home when needed, but also just having someone in the community who might have more experience, or having someone there figuring it out with you. You know, on my tiny home, trying to install like a fan one day that had complicated instructions, having someone who was good at that help me, and that really bonded us both, and it's a way for us to like grow our wider connections in a community bond. The community itself is very diverse, and it's exciting that it's just so many people looking at this option and making connections that wouldn't have necessarily otherwise made these connections.
So describe it to me. How many people are there, and are you on a specific piece of land, or are you dispersed throughout the community? Like, flesh it out for us so we can imagine the collective.
Yeah, so we're not a cooperative, and we're not a formal housing cooperative, as in we're not going to live together in any sort of future. We share knowledge and resources. So we're across community. We're across Los Angeles primarily, and now extended beyond. Our co-op is owned by 14 owner members, and then our community of like active community members who come to our workshops, and that is wider than that. Just under 100 people who are like learning and growing with us. And so these are people who just help each other with these skills and learn from each other all across. So there's you know, someone on the call, I think he's Gerardo today. He's a part of Latch Collective because he is a homeowner who wants to explore what could be possible on his space, and learn some skills, and might potentially, you know, have a tiny home on his property, and wants to connect with how he would do that and have a community help him with that project.
But for the three of you, how do you deal with people who may not be pro tiny homes? not in my backyard, those who, not in my driveway, what are the tools you're using, or how are you not necessarily confronting, but how are you pivoting that mindset or addressing that mindset that might be in a community, whether it's an empty piece of land in terms of Shira, where she might have some tiny homes, or Neil or Teresa, where you want to bring something in like an ACU. How do you, leapfrog over that barrier or reduce it?
Well, I like to remind folks, oftentimes a concern, as we were talking about earlier, that there's this notion of single family housing, and rightfully folks want to protect the character of their neighborhood. But I like to remind folks that neighborhood character is really nothing without your neighborhood characters. And so by opening that up, and loosening things a little bit, you can offer opportunity for folks, the characters in the neighborhood, and offering a little bit of diversity, right, for the characters in your neighborhood. Maybe an accessory commercial unit might look like not even retail, where folks are going to be potentially driving up or creating traffic, but maybe somebody's making something. Maybe they're making everyday carry toolkit organizers, for your pocket knife and your flashlight. They're just cutting and punching leather in there. When you think about going on a walk and walking by that shop, right, that's sort of an interesting character of the neighborhood that you might want to talk to, and something interesting that your kids might get to see. So it's not scary, it's nothing abnormal. It's just more neighborhood characters.
Teresa, Shira, how do you deal with that NIMBYism?
I think for the tiny home community, it's extremely important to have like a legal route for tiny homes. For many years, it was that there was these people building their own structures and having this movable concept that didn't fit into a legal definition. And so it was all done in secret and in hiding, and shaming people into not being able to fully be a part of the community, really, because they don't feel comfortable inviting others into their home. So being able to legalize them first really helped to, create that framework. And it was interesting, at least in many of the communities, they didn't have a big NIMBYism pushback. But there are, currently it's just about like improving the standards and improving these new housing options and really seeing them as a benefit to the community. A lot of people homeowners can see like, okay, well, how could I benefit from this? And how can tiny homes add value to the wider community, and keep having that conversation? It's important.
Shira, have you faced that in your work as well? The need to combat NIMBYism, and how is EBPREC dealing with that? Your audio is off.
Sorry about that. A little bit, yes. We're actually working with the Black Cultural Zone and East Oakland Collective in East Oakland. We have a wonderful collaborative vision to work on a multi-property basis in a residential neighborhood, take down fences, add ADUs. So you're actually combining green space and creating a small little local village. So there is some hills to climb as far as shifting attitudes in the neighborhoods. A lot of folks think tall fences make good neighbors, and also don't try like you build an ADU in my backyard, who's going to live there? I don't want a stranger living in my backyard. So there's those kinds of attitudes that a lot of fears that have been historically justified. So it's the way we are addressing it is through community organizing, education, upskilling community to really to take ownership of and so we can put ourselves in the driver's seat of development and say, this is what we want. That collective vision isn't for everyone. So it is about educating people what it is. So I would say, I love what you said, Teresa, about legalizing is the first step. I think demystifying is the other step. Just really introducing folks to what is a tiny home, what is an ADU, what is a cooperative, what is collective living.
And I would add to that, you know, in the US, the tendency is to always publicize and air the negative. But most people I speak to want to actually provide affordable housing for family. So it's not a random individual that most individuals I come across are interested in. It's people they actually know. And their viewpoint doesn't get as much play. We spend so much time talking about those who are living in fear and not giving enough space to those who actually want to do. And I think if we spent more time airing these stories, because I haven't met any Black family who doesn't want to rent to their family member. And most others that I've met want to take in someone who's homeless. So they're interested in solving a problem, but we always talk about those who don't want to see change, and we don't spend enough time, give enough airspace to those who do want to do that change. And so the question to all three of you is, well, this is probably like the hot seat question, but it's not really, is what is the change that you would like to see to have your mutual businesses grow? What is the thing that prevents you from the market to take real hold?
For tiny homes, something that needs to happen is an improved national standard, actually, and more industry is working together on this. Like, we're kind of in an area where tiny homes are legalized as park model RVs with additional improvements. And so like, this isn't going to really cut it as far as in efficiency and sustainability and actual characteristics of the home that many people who live tiny actually want to see, that the standard isn't high enough. And so it's a big question as to how to like create this national standard for a movable house that people are really trying to figure out and work on.
Neil, what do you think?
Yeah, I think if we just focus on accessory commercial units, I think the zoning barriers can be accomplished. I think some of the building code issues can be sorted out, right? When you stack uses, you might be required to do sprinklers. If we put them side by side, maybe not, right? So I think that can be accomplished. I think the hardest thing, similarly to ADUs in the beginning, is going to be the appraisal and financing. Most likely an appraiser in a lot of communities isn't going to have any comparable or any sort of thing to compare that to, or understand what sort of resale value that's going to have in the market. I know that's still a concern even here in Portland with ADUs, and where you have a lot of ADUs, you know, it just takes time for a product to mature from an appraisal standpoint. And so I think that will be the hardest to overcome. And I think in the beginning, anybody building any accessory commercial units will probably be doing that cash or some sort of HELOC.
Gotcha. Shira?
I think of a few different things. One is kind of cooperatives, especially limited equity housing cooperatives, but of course all types of cooperatives. I'm a big advocate to be written into more laws and more funding and financing. It's difficult to, you know, when we approach a bank, our approach is we're de-risking community like we're the organization that acts on behalf of community to de-risk people that might otherwise be seen by banks as a risky investment. So we're saying, hey, look at all of our investors and our community owners that have bought in. So we're acting on behalf, but at the same time, they still are like, well, what are you? What's a cooperative? So we do have wonderful partners that we're working with, but that's one thing. And also from a legal standpoint, working with the city of Oakland on some funding, and they don't actually have, well, we're written into the notice of funding application. We're not actually, haven't written out regulations so that we're can actually acquire those funds. And we're looking at that on the state level as well. Another aspect is accepting a cooperative as that's not nonprofit but not for profit, that services community to achieve some of the benefits, the financial benefits of nonprofits. I think that would be very helpful, as well as just accessibility, and this also speaks to just creating sustainable buildings for all of us. There's a cost to it. while there's some long-term savings, cost savings, usually, especially in marginalized communities with less cash, that initial investment can be quite a barrier.
Well, I think there's hope on the way, because just today there was a press release. The FDIC is seeking a financial advisor to establish a new mission-driven bank fund to support FDIC-insured minority banks and community development financial institutions. So I'm truly excited by this announcement today. We'll just cross our fingers and hope that money flows eventually. So now I wanna pivot to our Q&A, and feel free to send more. Hopefully they're not in the chat. Erin writes, thank you all. What do you think is the biggest benefit of ADUs during the pandemic to foster social connection? Can you share an example from the real world that amplified this? So ADUs fostering social connection, real examples, not theory.
I think for tiny homes as ADUs, there are many examples of basically people hosting a tiny home for like work share, people wanting to live because that homeowner has a certain need, you know, and if we're flexible in like the benefits, not just being that I have a need for extra income, but I have a need for, let's say, childcare, or I have a need for, you know, repairs done on the property, as we're talking about, like people build skills if they're building their home, and being able to connect and share resources in that way because of the close proximity. You know, it goes with COVID if you're not really trying to go beyond your housing bubble, but you're able to like have a period of your life when you recognize what needs you have and kind of go and say, what do I need and what's my ideal kind of match, is pretty exciting. And so I don't know if I have an example from times of COVID, but there are many people who are like basically getting less like doing work for that homeowner in exchange for less rent, right?
Great. Any other suggestions? Okay, there's a basic question. For a mobile tiny home, how do you connect to water and sewer?
So it is required in most of the cities to have a utility connection. So this would be like an extension of the utility from the home, like you would have utilities extended for an ADU, extended to the area where the tiny home, this is for if you were doing it legally in Los Angeles, let's say, you'd have them extended. So you do underground work development, and then you bring up the connection. So like an electric post or you know, a water spigot that you would connect your home to, kind of like an RV parking pad would look.
What about sewer?
Yeah, so
that's a little bit more challenging.
It's challenging, but it's still there. Like you just basically have the sewer hose connector going into the receptacle for the sewer. So you have a specific black water that generally runs over the hose under the home, that the home's parked right under that connector, and it connects securely to the sewer. So it's required to be on sewer, at least in the city of Los Angeles. They don't want to embrace composting toilets quite yet.
I was going to ask about that.
So I came across an article recently that showed here in Portland, a gentleman has built a tent over his driveway. And so in the way that we're talking about accessory commercial units, you know, kind of fronting in front of a residential structure, this tent though is offering a tutoring program for kids during the COVID time. So he realized that his kid was suffering, having to sit in front of a computer for hours and hours on end. And he said, surely this can be better. And so they've set up desks with guards and are inviting kids to come and sort of socialize a little bit and do tutoring sessions.
I love that. I think it's great. I'm just loving the whole commerce and alternative ways of using the space. Okay, John Crowley asks, what do you define as a small scale developer? I think that's for you, Neil, or even might be for Shira.
Yeah.
How small is small?
Yeah.
Or how
really,
large is small?
It's kind of funny because even the word developer, if I'll address that one first, is if you like write in your like scratch out your name on anybody's business card and write your own name and then just write under it like developer, damn it. Right? And then now you're a developer, right? As long as you're thinking about some kind of idea, right? I would say you're a developer. You know, there's some skills you probably have to learn, right? But there's no secret handshake. You know, like there's not a developer accreditation handshake where they get to know the secret math. It's like 8th grade math, and it's really just how you kind of put that together that really makes you. So, and then the word small, really we're probably looking at typically 1 to 3 stories. You know, when you get to your 4th story, you start to look at additional requirements for multiple staircases, and depending on where you put your accessible units, might require an elevator, which then starts to get into a whole new level of complexity. When you get above 3 units, when you get above 2 units, you'll have to get into the commercial building code, right? So there's these thresholds of complexity that happen as you increase your size. And so depending on your comfort level and your skill set, you know, that level might be very small for you, or it might be medium, wherever you want to jump in on that staircase. But it's typically 1 to 3 stories, maybe 1 to 20 units.
Are you seeing any you know, in the ADU market, there's this plethora of developers who are equity based, who will build the ADU for you on your site. God forbid you decide to do that. But is that are we seeing that kind of developer in the tiny home industry, where someone's willing to, you know, quote unquote, design, develop, and bring the tiny home to your site? Are we seeing anything like that in the tiny home market? Is there such a thing as a tiny home market?
Yes, a growing industry of tiny home builders. Most people, like we help people kind of imagine what it would be like for them to build it themselves, but building your own home does take a lot of skill and time. So most people will go with buying their tiny home from someone. It's just the disconnect right now of only so many cities legally being able to host them. So now that we do see the legal framework, now builders are becoming educated on the actual requirements and helping their clients navigate those so that they can work with homeowners. I've seen actually builders help their clients like put out ads, like flyers, create flyers and be like, this is this couple, actually like a gay couple with their cute little dog. Hey, this is us. And this is kind of like creating a profile. And so the builders are actually helping them form connections in the community, because it's in their incentive. Like the homeowner, the tiny home client might not want to get started with their project until they have a place. So it really is the incentive of the builders to make connections in community. And it's what we're lacking right now, is the actual connection to more homeowners who know about this and are willing.
So we have one more question. I'm going to get to Sarah's question, but it also brings up a point. Last year, I was a speaker at the Tiny Village Festival. I don't know if you guys know about it, but it's a hoot. I guess it's a national conference of tiny home builders and alternative living. And one person in the audience, she asked this question: can I have a tiny home because that's what she can afford, because she can't afford the actual cost of the foundation? Can she get a tiny home and then later, like in a year or two, then build the foundation and just like connect the structure to the foundation? Have you seen anyone go down that pathway? Then I'll go to Sarah's question.
That would be pretty complex. I would say that it would be possible if you were very, very, very ingenious and worked with a brilliant architect on like trying to meet multiple sets of codes. Like you'd need to meet that local building code and residential code, as well as the movable aspects of it. And so maybe it's not too ingenious, but you would need to be really paying attention to like where that location that you'd need it to move it to. And somehow the builder being like certified or recognized as like a manufactured home builder would help, whereas like that would then potentially be like licensed or recognized by the state as a type of home. So it's more like what is this home actually classified as, and maybe the home
prefab. It's prefab.
Right. The prefab.
That's what I'm like. It's a mobile prefab that then you didn't put a foundation under. I'm not getting too deep into the story,
right.
But it is a question that I have received from several African American families in Oakland. Is it possible to convert, once I have a tiny home, mobile structure, can I then convert it to a permanent structure?
And that's where looking into
Yeah.
what already exists and manufactured housing and prefab, that those are already options that exist. So like going not necessarily extreme tiny, because most of those are over 400 square feet, and looking
Yeah.
at, you know, what you can do that in these routes, and you don't need to build it that small to be, if those are your goals, right?
Yeah, but they're starting small. Okay, Sarah, I'm going to get to your question. What are the costs for how occupants share, what are the choices for how occupants share water and sewer costs? And are there organizations, are organized programs in your communities to recruit and train neighbors? So I guess this is for a little bit for Teresa. Do you have a program that recruits and trains neighbors to do repairs? Or are you a collective of mutually minded individuals? And then how do you share water and sewer costs for a tiny home?
Or other restrictions. Okay, so I would say that for the question about recruiting and training neighbors, in a way, it's, you know, we're recruiting people to learn skills and work, but not putting them into the workforce and going out there. Habitat for Humanity has a great program. I work for Habitat for Humanity, and you know, they have a rehabilitation program for existing homes that, you know, when we have volunteers, have volunteers helping with that kind of program. So you know, rehabbing what already exists is really important, but does anyone else have something to say for the sharing water and sewer costs? I don't have much information on that.
I think that's just a general agreement.
I mean, you can sub-meter. There are meters that you can put in the water lines, you know, at different breaks in the system. And so you can sub-meter that if you need to. But I think the most straightforward is just to do a flat charge based on averages. Sometimes before something is built, you kind of know the water usage, and then you can track how that has increased if you wanted to break it apart that way.
I think that's the easiest.
Yeah, I own a duplex, and it runs on one water meter. And so what I do is just a water charge per person, you know, and that can flex with the household size. And so, you know, that way one person isn't taxed, you know, paying the same as two people.
Cool. All right, we have 3 minutes. And so the next 2 minutes, my big question is, what's next for all of you? What is the #1 goal for 2021? You have 2 minutes total. #1 goal for 2021, because 2020 is done. What's your #1 goal for 2021?
I can't wait. 2021, I want to focus on small development counts. So I want to take the efforts of these, what seem to be small, and look at how these small projects can be aggregated to show a big effect. So small buildings, big impacts, and kind of make the case for small development.
Shira, 2021?
2021 for us will be a lot about focusing on our 7th Street Cooperative Corridor concept and projects there for the Black arts community, and education, outreach, collective governance, and I'm forgetting something. Oh, and our dark
Small goals.
Small goals.
Teresa?
Well, we are a cooperative and we're in the middle of our strategic planning, so I cannot speak on behalf of everyone at this moment, but I would say that we are hoping to really grow this backyard connect idea that we have of matching homeowners and tiny home owners, so that we can see a rise in people actually using the legal tools available to them, and more using of the tools available and living tiny.
I'll put my number 1 for 2021. At first, I was not necessarily a huge advocate of tiny homes. I like them, they're cute. But once I began to understand how many families were interested in them, and the way they were viewing their use, and how they were seeing it more as an entry to a bigger permanent structure later down the line, my desire for 2021 is that most cities will eventually allow them to be used as ADUs, so that families can actually have these structures legally on their site, so we can get unhoused individuals housed and that we allow the changes that need to happen across the entire state of California, hopefully. That is my desire for 2021. And we have 1 minute. So thanks again to all the panelists and the audience for joining us today at Build It Green and putting this together. We're going to continue the conversation about ADUs through a regenerative lens. Register for Build It Green's next fall forum, which occurs December 2nd, where we will explore the building system through the eyes of owners, renters, and concierge services in the event topic, owning and renting an ADU. So owning and renting an ADU, December 2, register on the Build It Green website. You can register today at builditgreen.org or at the link provided in the group chat. Let's see if it's in there. I don't see it. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. It's in the group chat?
Yep, it looks like it is.
Perfect. Okay. Hope to see you there, and goodbye. Have a great rest of the evening. Have some cocktails, everyone.
Thank you. It was
Thanks,
a pleasure.
everyone. Bye.